absolutely honored for this month, this day, having Phil here, and so many people, Tony Angel. But we're just I'm gonna actually, before I start saying too much, I'm gonna hand it over to Andrew. But once the talk is over, we'll be getting our chairs out, and then we'll bring in our refreshments and snacks and wine, and you guys can stay and visit as long as we want to, and there will be time for questions. And I guess without further ado, I'll pass it over to you.
All right.
Yeah. Andrew, this is Andrew Valley, in case you know.
All right. Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah, I was nervous.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for coming out tonight. This is an extraordinary show and event that we're having here, so thank you all for being here. And I want to thank a few other people on behalf of myself and everyone at the Smith and Valley Gallery here that were involved in putting this together. And first, I would before I get to the artist, I'd like to thank McCracken. It was a joy and delightful experience to work with her in putting this show together. And I also would very much like to thank Kim Bone for helping in that process as well. She was invaluable to us all. And Tim Bruce is around here as well. Tim's a longtime friend and collector of Phil, and he brought Phil today, so he was also very helpful in helping us learn more about this artwork. So I thank him very much. And then, of course, Tony Angel will be speaking about Phil's work in just a little bit here too, so I thank him for coming today. So now on to the stars of the show. I want to thank Phil himself for being a part of the show with us. It's a humbling experience for me to have an artist like himself here in my gallery, so it kind of leaves me a little bit speechless. So I won't say too much more about Phil and his work. Tony's gonna do that thankfully for me. And of course, I would like to thank Kris Ekstrand for once again delivering a beautiful show for us here at the gallery. We've worked with her for many years now, and she continues to get better and better and bring us better and better shows. So thanks, Kris. So hopefully I didn't forget anything, probably did, but without further ado, I believe Kris is going to start us off and talk a little bit about her work. So,
great, thank you.
And an honor to be here. Thank you to Smith and Valley, Andrew, Wes, Lucy, Mary, Camille, everybody who does such great work on our behalf. And Tony, it's great to have you here. We go back a ways in environmental education, and it's really a pleasure. It is special to be anywhere where Phil and Ann are, but this is really something right here. And it's been an honor to see my work under the same roof, and thank you both to Anna and Phil. If you drove up from Seattle today, you dropped into the valley at Starboard Road, and you probably thought, the Skagit Valley. And then maybe you took Gail's advice and got off at Conway and found yourself, whether you knew it or not, on Fur Island. Fur Island is created by the two branches of the Skagit River that fork right around there. And to me, it's one of the most magical places in the valley, because when I'm out on Fur Island near that, fork, I really feel like I am in one of the most ancient parts of the Skagit Valley. Up until the middle of the 1800s, it was totally packed with log jams that had been building up for 1,000 years. You might not have even known there was a river under there, and those log jams went all the way up past Mount Vernon, and forests grew on top of them, and salmon swam under them, and people walked across it. And that period was very brief, and they disappeared. But when I'm out there, I really feel a connection to not just the old Skagit River, the old undammed Skagit River, but the sloughs that connect this whole ecosystem together. I can imagine that I'm standing on one. In fact, I am standing on one because Fur Island is dike farmland, and the tide rises under your feet. Then you probably drove over past, as you drove past Fur Island, you're really driving through Richard Wilkie country, where he painted rarely more than about 5 miles away from his house, his studio. And then passing O'Connor and those ancient lands of the Samish and the Swinomish and the Upper Skagit, who lived and worked up and down this waterway. And all those lumpy glacial drumlins out there, those funny shaped lumps of landscape that Clayton James loved and Guy Anderson painted. Then you're kind of in the holy grail there, sort of the source of Northwest art, I guess, in one way, one part of it anyway. Where what we think of as the Northwest mystics perhaps lived there, perhaps they passed through. Continuing on up, you drive up past Padilla Bay. And I live right around Padilla Bay. And, and I walk on that dike trail, and I'm sure many of you do too. And our pictures of it are the snapshots that we put on Instagram are gorgeous, and they're perfect. But it's actually, to me, it's kind of the intersection of all the tension that is going on in the landscape, in our environment. First of all, you're walking on a dike, built in the turn of the century maybe. There's A6s overhead. There's a oil refinery one direction, and then when you turn and look the other direction, there is a plywood plant. And there's also this wonderful tide gate that keeps salt water out of our farmland, which is like the whole trick to farming in the Skagit Valley. So in a way, it's a place of incredible, beautiful tension and use. And it's not pristine, but it is beautiful. And then you come around Bayview Ridge and past the Brazil Center and the Padilla Bay Reserve, which Tony was elemental in helping to save. Tony Stevens just reminded me of this today, that in the 80s, Edna Brazil and a group of her Garden friends helped save Padilla Bay from development that would have made it look a lot like those communities in Florida, right? And now it remains one of the biggest preserves of eelgrass. And then you come into the Samish watershed and you cross that quiet river, and you arrive in Edison, where my studio has been only for the last year. And my studio was always in my garage at my house in Bayview. And I moved it 5 miles away, which you would think would be, what difference could that make? And it has been an amazing year of, one, painting things I didn't think I was going to paint because I had something else in mind. And two, once I got here, that the environment was completely different. Looking at Lummi every day, looking at a slough every day, thinking about what that slough is connected to, watching the weather that comes from the Fraser River that's so different from what we see just around Bayview Ridge. So what you see here is, I guess, it's a little bit like a field journal of the last year. The weather, the season, the landscape, the nests that kind of, in my mind, hold it all together and represent that tension, that beautiful balance imbalance, fragility, strength, risk, volume, that I've learned more about this past year. I hope the work speaks to itself. I guess the only thing I would say is there's basically 3 media here. These are landscape monotypes, which I consider to be paintings. They're a hybrid between painting and printmaking. And this is a commercial. If you would like to see a demonstration of the monotype process, I'm going to open my studio tomorrow afternoon between 1 and 4. And a couple of friends and I are going to be making monotypes, and you're welcome to just drop in and take a look. But the monotype's basically a combination of painting and printmaking. The nests, which keep drawing me back, I originally started drawing nests because I guess I originally started drawing nests because I was interested in their construction and how they were made. And I didn't know of any other objects that worked quite like a nest does. But then when I started drawing them, especially on that huge, well, not huge, but bigger scale, what really interested me was the energy, the centrifugal force, the gravity, the irony of a nest that looks so fragile and yet can withstand so much. So that's what kept me with them, and I don't see them going away anytime soon. So I think that's all I can say about my work, other than I really appreciate you taking a look at it and the support that a number of people in this room have given me the past couple of years just in being you. So any questions about process or my practice or tools? I think if there's a place that my work intersects with Phil's, it's really through a sense of place. Phil, as you no doubt know, grew up on the shores of Anacortes. He felt it, he knew it. And I think there's a lot of ways that art can help. I think there's a lot of ways that art can fuel conservation, all kinds of art, whether it's raising awareness or alarming people or reminding us of what's at risk. But another thing I really learned from environmental educators is that unless people know about a place, they're not going to care about it. And if they don't care about it, they sure as hell aren't going to do anything to conserve it. So I hope that's what my work is about. I know that Phil's is. And I had a landscape painter I really admire look at my paintings recently, or my monotypes, and say, well, Kris, I know that you know the Skagit River springs from 150 miles across, up the Cascades, and I know that you know that the dikes are historic part of the Skagit Valley. He said, but it doesn't really matter to me when I look at your paintings. The painting really has to stand on its own. And I thought about that, and I decided I think about that exactly the opposite, really. That the painting is less important than what I know about it. Or at least what I've come to believe about it. And the paintings sort of come after. So, but it did give me something to think about. So, thank you.
Well, all these birds' nests, what birds make the nest?
What birds are they? Well, I'm not an ornithologist. I'm not even, as Libby knows, a very serious birder. But I have a lot of friends who are. So when I start working on a nest, I'd say it's sort of like having a portrait subject in my studio. I know nothing about them. Like say if I was doing portraiture. I don't really know that person, but I'm interested in kind of getting at it. So along the way, of course, one of my friends tells me who made your nest. Obviously, some of these nest builders are more adept than others. Some of them, you wonder, is this the best you could do? And others are just, I have a nest, some of you knew Patty Betzer, the great Sketch Valley artist who died recently. I have a Swainson's thrush nest in my studio right now that's a work of art. And it's so beautiful, I really am able to get my imagination around it. But sometimes I know and sometimes I don't, but sometimes it's more important than others.
It's like when people paint mountains, sometimes they know the names of the mountains, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's my pleasure now to introduce Tony Angel, who is an artist, an author, an illustrator, an environmental educator, and one of the best bronze sculptors the Northwest has ever produced, and a dear friend of Ann and Phil's. His work is in collections in the Northwest and far beyond, and he has an awesome new piece at Seattle University right now, which I don't know how much it weighs. I think it's granite and bronze, and it's red hot, and I'm going to see it this week. It was just installed about 3 weeks ago, so no one can speak to Phil's work, I don't think, more knowledgeably than Tony is, so it's really a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you.
There's 3 seats up here, so if anybody in the back does want to come up front, now would be the time. 2 seats. There's 2.
Well, I'm going to start by looking around and saying once again, as I've said a few times already, this is one historical gathering. Artists that I've admired, corresponded with, worked with, and moreover, coming together in honor of one of the icons of the Northwest and of the country, and of expressing oneself as Phil has, like no one before him. I have to start, because it's my way of kind of warming up with a story, with true story, usually pretty true. Some years ago, I had hastened up from Seattle to get my 600 Moon book signed at an opening at the Museum of Northwest Art. Dolores Tarzan was there, Bill was there, and on the way, I didn't think it would be a bad idea to pick up a dead weasel along the side of the road. And when I think of the way in which Phil embraces nature, I'm sure he's done more than his share of picking up what he would find, and of course evidence of the way he combines it with his amazing sculptures indicates that you don't pass up a good subject or a possibility. I picked it up, and by the time I got to Rexville, I realized I'd made a big mistake. As we know, weasels are related to skunks. And this weasel had been on the road probably 2 or 3 days. It was a warm, early summer day. And I put it over on the passenger side, and I guess I got to the outskirts of LaConner, and I realized I'm going to pay for this. The windows were down. To this day, I'm not sure where it ended up, but I found a little side street, picked it up gingerly and dropped it, and moved on to the museum. But you don't walk away from a weasel that's been run over, been out in the sun for 3 days, you carry it with you. I walked into the Museum of Northwest Art, and like Moses, the audience parted, and there was Phil. And I took my book, I said, this isn't so great, but, and I think, Phil, to this day, you looked at me like, I know where you've been. I know what you've been doing. Fortunately, we had enough breath in us with that relief, and then the waters reconvene around the author and the artist. But that always stayed with me. I hope not today. The degree to which I have followed Phil's career. By the way, Mary Randall, who has documented Phil in such a remarkable way, it's her birthday today. She's 94. If you open your iridescent light book, and I hope you have one because there's a great chapter in there on Phil, and you see the picture, two of them in particular of Phil, one with Mountain Bird in its original model form, and here's Phil with his arm around the model, looking up into the camera with this great, genuine, happy, engaging expression. And that alone is an inspiration. Somebody who engages their work to that degree. And then I looked at his big hands, and I could see the work that, you can imagine the work that was being done with those hands. And then the other picture in the book on a porch on Guaymas Island with the fawn, which is a pretty famous picture. This intimate interaction between the fawn and Phil on the porch. So when I look back on the kind of inspiration that the artists get, not just from the work, but from the understanding a little bit about the man and his family and Anne and their boys, you realize there's a model. There is a model to consider and to incorporate into the kinds of goals that you have for yourself. I've written down a few things that, in general, I think summarize, because this is not a lecture on his career and his entire work. That would require a course, frankly. But I would like to highlight a few things because I think it's reflected in the work that's gathered here today. And as you go around and engage yourself with it, you might reflect a little bit about it. A couple of things that have come to mind. The work, to me, is suggestive of a lifetime of adventure and engagement. And an artist will often employ his or her art, and I think Kris alluded to that in some of the paintings that she was referencing here, to understand the world, to get farther into the questions. You don't have the answers when you engage yourself into the work. And maybe you don't even have the answers when you finish the work until you step back from it and look and see what subconsciously has been invested. You look over at this group of three engaged young birds in the nest. And suddenly you can walk away and imagine the design and apply your senses to it and look at it from all the angles. But there's much more to it than that. What's on the mind of the artist? What's on the mind of the observer? Here's a challenge. Three young birds facing the life ahead, open to the dependency of the family. There's a reflection of the family here as well. You walk into the center of the gallery here and you see that beautiful sculpture of the owls, and then off the wooden sculpture, and then off to the bronzes on the other side. Again, a reflection of collective family and warmth and design. Phil has been able to apply what I would call the Thoreauvian ethic. And I understand that Thoreau was an influence on his early career, and he gave it some thought. But one of the things that Thoreau charged individuals with is to go to the woods to live deliberately, to confront the essentials of life, to simplify, simplify, simplify. And as you walk around and look at the collection of Phil's work, this is exactly what has gone on. There's been a distillation. There's been a simplification down to the essence of the subject. It's not just the subject alone, but it's also reflection of the connection between people and nature, people in that moment, and the mechanism of helping us understand how to be better human beings I think the vehicle here is the sculpture itself. We can identify with nature at the same time that we identify with what we have in common with nature. And one of the things that has occurred to me, and I think to all of us in this room, is we're living at a very bewildering time, if not chaotic. What do we believe in? What can we trust in? And I think art has given us, particularly the level of art that we see in this room today, a subject to trust in, to believe in, to go to, and to respond to apply our senses to. It's going to stay there. It's going to invite us, and that's what the art, we hope, can do. Invite us in, particularly when it is both subtle and inviting, particularly when it plays up the emotion and is not distracted by detail. And that's what Phil's work has done ever since he started his career, as far as I can tell, and is doing it to this day. So if there's one edict or one thought that I would like to leave you with, because, and we're going to open this to questions, by the way, where maybe we can touch on specific things that are on your mind. A long time ago, I had occasion to think about some of this. Well, it wasn't too long ago, actually, but think about some of this matter of how does my art or anyone else's art translate into a world that is going back and forth with information. And when we invest what we have, as we have in this room today, the heart, the soul, the belief, and even what emerges from our subconscious, we're delivering a message here. And it will indeed endure. So the thought is that when words fail, and by golly, a lot of them are failing today, art will prevail. Thank you. Probably a more to the point and a more specific kind of response that both Kris and I can give to some questions that you might have, however you want to frame them, whatever you want to ask. I have a lot more notes here, but I wanted to cut to the chase and hear from you. So please, let us respond accordingly. And I know the artists out here are going to ask some questions. Oh, I'm overwhelmed. You want to know what happened to that weasel? I don't know. I've already told you that. Yes, in the back.
This isn't exactly a question. I'm really honored to be here with both of these artists, both Kris and Philip. But I recently saw the Andy Goldsworthy film, Leaning into the Wind. Mm-hmm. And there was a wonderful comment that he made that I think is applicable to what's in this room. And it was not about anything he made, but it was literally at the very end when he was stumbling up the highland to the brink of this cliff or steep incline to lean into the wind. You saw him blown back, but he actually did it. And as the voiceover as he was going up said, there was, when I actually leaned into the wind, a great moment of clarity. And he said, I think that's what a good artwork does. You look at it, and there's a moment of clarity, and everything seems doable or possible. And then you go back into the world that you're talking about, our chaotic world. And I think, narratives like Kris is doing, and Philip of nature.
As much as the arrival, it's the journey as much as it is the destination and completion for the pleasure that it gives us. But coming back and referencing the work here today and some of the sculptures that I've looked at, I really understand more and more of what Phil brings to his, it's a challenge, whatever we pick to do, it is a challenge. And we accept that. And that's what makes life so interesting. But the influences, and I'm going to circle around to my point here, that the Northwest Coast people, Tlingit, Tsimshian, Haida, farther north, the Inuit, Aleut, Eskimo, you look at some of the way in which they have interpreted nature. And like Phil, I would be the first to say that when I am doing a work, and I think Phil has said this, that there's this connectedness to nature that defies explanation or definition. You don't set out necessarily to say, I'm going to define it. You feel it. And that feeling directs your hands, if you're a sculptor. And it stays with your hands to go back and reference it. And I would challenge some of you, because when we have our sculpture, and I think Leo would agree, and David and Peregrine, we encourage sculptors, the people that want to see our work, touch it. Touch it. I don't care what the people at the museum tell you. Do it respectfully. Because God knows this technical world we live in is cutting us off from this sensual side of us. It's so human. And when you look at nature, you don't see the sensuality to it. I was sitting in a garden over here at the wonderful little restaurant at the end of town, watching a couple of sparrows get it on, and courtship. And I'm thinking, whoa, I've got to get a better look. And I about dropped my taco getting over there. But the fact that you have this reverential side emerging is something that I think, well, I'm certainly proud of what I see here in this show. I'm proud for Phil and proud for us in the Northwest. I know that we've all had our influences. Of course, Phil had a profound influence when he was in England, working with the remarkable sculptor that he worked with. But on the other hand, Phil has gone on very quickly to be his own artist, to be McCracken, and to be, in fact, iconic. And what he has done with the forms that he has chosen, I think, is so unique and special. It's enduring and be with us. Yeah. Come on, get up here. Come on.
Yes.
Come on. You have a question? Or you want?
Yeah, I'm such an expert on bronze sculpture. I had a follow-up question on that, actually, is since you and Peregrine and our other bronze artists are here in the room today, I really feel what you were saying about the emotion and feeling and intuition guides your hand. But in the case of bronze work, it's not like you can just start over again. So I guess my question is, knowing what you do about Phil, how does process-wise his processes differ from work that you have done or that Peregrine has done or others, Leo? Is it different? Do you all work the same way?
Well, we'd have to follow each other around, I think, to really answer that. I think we would all agree that there are pieces we've done that we look at it and we say, I'll see you later. I can't figure you out. You're a mystery. And then I know Phil has covered some of his pieces so he's not distracted and he can concentrate on what he's doing. But then you can come back on another day and it may be another year after you were stymied and stuck and you look and there it is. There's the answer. I was doing, let's see, I'm looking around the room for my daughter. She may be here and she's never heard this story. I was doing a piece and maybe too public, I think. To be continued, okay? But those are the kinds of things that just couldn't, how am I going to do this? I got it done in about 3 days because I was so motivated, so inspired, I guess passionate about it, and I finished it. And there are all these motivating forces, and sometimes, of course, when you're going through a frustrating period and you're distracted by one thing or another, your art becomes a zen point. You know, you're going into your work because everything settles down. You can see something tangible in the intangible world we live in, something you can go back to. It has heft, it has shape, it has texture, and that's very rewarding. But as far as the process issue goes, I think we're all a little bit different. And ask others, you know, do you want to, Perry, you have a thought on that?
I can't imagine us being, I mean, obviously we have similar tools and we have similar materials that we work with, but I think we all are very differently. Phil has had multiple sculptures going, and as you said, some of them covered up. I'm totally dysfunctional if I have more than one piece going at a time. Like it has to be serial for me because I lose the focus and I lose that just kind of direct draw and kind of pressure to complete the piece that's integral to actually bringing it about. But for Phil, it works wonders to have that number of pieces going. And I think we all have really different processes.
I thought I would ask Anne for permission to tell the story of how you met. Do you mind? To tell the story of how you two met. Do you mind if I tell that? I worked together with Phil and Anne on 600 Bones, the book about Phil's work, and it was the first time I heard that story, which is in the book, so you will have to go there for the maybe a more factual account. But Anne can correct me. Anne was graduated from college, is that right?
No, I was teaching at the time. I was going for a doctorate at the University of London.
She was on, and what ship were you on?
I knew the name of it. Well, it was a troop ship in the second world.
Anne was traveling on a troop ship to London to pursue a doctorate.
10 days and $100.
10 days, $100. And I imagine you were in your early 20s, were you? Yeah. And your family was at home wondering about you, going off to England. And there was another traveler on that boat, and that was Phil, who was traveling to England to study with the great sculptor Henry Moore. And as they say, one thing led to another. And when Anne disembarked in London, she called her mother and said, "I'm not coming home." Oh, it's not my mother. Good point. Good point. So, Anne, how long after that were you married? 6 weeks. And Anne, in her own right, besides being a wonderful teacher, who probably there's people in this room who have Anne as a teacher, has been a force in the literary arts and sketch community that this place will be a much different place if it wasn't for you.
Tony, I did have another question.
Great.
Those same lines, I was wondering about when you and Phil's first met, and maybe not that first time, but those days when you got to know Phil and Ann, and how you, what were those days like?
Well, I had met Phil through Mary Randolph, who had begun her documentation, all the way back with Henry Miller, when she was filming authors and artists. And Phil was one of her wise first choices. And I later got to meet her when she lived in Woodway, and some people had purchased a couple of my drawings, and she saw them and said, well, you know, there's an artist, McCracken, that you ought to meet. And he was up on Guaymas, and I was down in Seattle, and the two were going to meet directly, but indirectly, and through Mary Randlett and the communications there, I kept hearing about this extraordinary artist. And I think Mary, in her wisdom, and if you've ever met Mary, you know she is and has been quite a character, and will say all kinds of things and mean half of them, but the other half, she wants to see what's going to happen when she says it. In any event, Phil had a show in Tacoma. She said, you got to get down there and meet this guy. He is a fine artist. And she was giving me advice in her own inimitable way. She's saying, you want to see somebody who's doing some fine work? Meet McCracken. So that's where we first met Phil. I don't know if you remember or not, but we did. And then subsequently, I was in conversations with Ann and indirectly with Phil on some projects with schools and environment. But I always charted the career. And I hope that to some degree, Phil followed some of my work as well through different intervals and different friends and people. And occasionally I talked to Phil on the phone. But that's the way it was. It was not as close as I would have liked it, for sure. But on the other hand, I'm God thankful that I've had it at all.
What year was that approximately?
Well, I was in the late 70s, 1980 in there somewhere. Yeah. So almost 40 years ago. So, time flies, doesn't it? Yeah. Another question. Come on, be brave. Yeah.
What years were you at Shorecrest?
I was at Shorecrest High School teaching psychology and English. The years were 66 and 67 and 68. And then I went and supervised the environmental education programs for the state after that, which to me was like a ticket to nature. Kept me out in the field constantly with kids where, you know, I could be doing things with students and at the same time being able to identify red-winged blackbird nest. Where's Kris? Oh, yeah. Marsh wren, junco, you know. I'll help you out, Kris, sometime. But that's when I was at Shorecrest, and that was a great experience. And someone from Oak Harbor said that I'd come out, because I would also go out to schools and take my artwork out there and share it with kids. And that was, of course, it's good to have an appreciative audience, obviously. But moreover, what was fun is to see kids turn on to art and to see that this is a great way to translate their feelings and ideas into something other than the typical short essay or some other kind of reportage that they recorded. They could do it in an image way. And every once in a while, kids that were in those school programs will come up to me now as middle-aged people and say, I remember when you came to my school and talked about art. And that really, meant a lot. And again, as I said in my opening remarks, that art will transcend words. I mean, I can hold up a picture I did 50 some years ago of a golden eagle, and kids can look at it and, whoa, I could go on for hours talking about them, but for them to see it, but moreover, no, not moreover, right along with that, they realized that I did that. And not that it's that remarkable, but the very fact that we can use our hands and our artistic expression at will, and we can cultivate that as a way of connecting with the world. And I remember it broke my heart. I had a hard time even telling the story. A kid, not once or twice, but over those years that I did this, coming up to me and saying I could never do that, having seen what I was doing. And I tell you, I sat right down and had a short talk about yes, you can. And we learn as much from our failures as we learn from our successes. You get the dead ends, and I talked about walking away from something and then coming back next year and seeing what needed to be done. But we don't give up. We keep trying. we break through, and I can just see Phil in his work in his studio juggling all of these magnificent artifacts that he's collected along the beaches and integrating them so beautifully into the work, which is, again, a singular expression of McCracken, what he's been able to do. And then still bring out that whole form in such a way with all these subtleties that also provide contact and engagement by the observer. Yes, nice and loud.
Speaking of students, I was a student of yours in the scientific illustration program.
Oh, is that right?
In Washington. Wasn't a mother yet, but your inspiration and your passion for nature, I was already that way, but it just upped my level completely. So we go sailing and we draw, we take our journals, like you had said, go when you go out, you just always are drawing. And so she knows every native plant. She some just exists by herself in the woods and we find it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Gosh, yeah. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. First, did Phil have any apprentices ever?
I don't know. Phil, did you have some apprentices at your studio and people that were working with you over time? Very few. Likewise. Just the way I work, it was not easy to engage an apprentice on any regular basis. Gretchen Diver worked with me off and on. She was a printmaker, worked with Everett Dupin. I knew Everett Dupin out at the university. She worked with me for off and on for about 7 years in periodic times. But having somebody who was regularly there was difficult just by the way I work, because I might be writing or drawing or, and having that focus was a little bit difficult. I'll tell you one thing that Gretchen did that spoiled me for any subsequent apprentice that I might have had. She called me up, and she and her husband lived in West Seattle, and now they live in Leavenworth, but she said, you know what, I'm a printmaker, but I want to learn how to sculpt, and could I come out and just kind of help you out a little bit? And I, okay, well, I may be there, I may not, but come on out, 10 o'clock. She comes out, she took a look at my studio, and by the way, you're going to see in some of those pictures of Phil, in iridescent light in particular, the one I'm thinking of, not only is he embracing his form, but you can see this action in his studio in the background, which is a beautiful thing to see in its own right. You walked into my studio like Gretchen does, she took a look, she says, I think I'm leaving. I can't make any sense out of this. This is a mess. What kind of tools do you use? And I said, well, right now I can't find any. So for the first week, she did nothing, God bless her, but organize my studio for me. And a lot of apprentices come in and say, I want to be an artist, I want to make big money, I want to be in, and I don't. I mean, that's happened, actually. It can. No, I know, but she was willing to learn from the ground up, as she really did. And it was a blessing to me, as that kind of an association should be, if possible. And then she's gone on to be quite an accomplished stone carver in her own right. She has pieces in the public area over there. Another question? Yeah, Kurt.
I wondered, Phil, I don't know if you feel like it or not, but I wondered if you'd be willing to share a few words with us about Tableau or another piece that's in here. Or just hear from you what about your process or about a particular piece. Have anything you want to share? No? Okay.
Yeah.
Phil, could you tell us why you covered all of your work in your studio?
Why do you cover the work of the studio, Phil, when you're out there? Yeah, pretty simple. You're not distracted. I would agree.
Well, he told me once that it was because they would call to him if he...
Well, sure. Yeah, come on over here. Pay attention.
Sorry, I'm busy on something else.
Yeah, you've got... You know it's waiting. Yeah, and it is. No, literally. Because not to get Well, I don't care if I get mythical or mystical about it. It's, the fact is, in stone or wood or shell, whatever you're working, it has a voice. It calls out, hey, McCracken, come here, come over here. What do you think? And we look at it, and we look at it again, and we kind of search it out. And in stone, it has a sound to it. It has a texture, it has a color, and it has a solidity, that all of which is a voice. You know, you can do some things in this, and you can't do it in other things. And that can be a distraction. You've got a lot of things out there. You don't cover them up. You don't focus. A friend of mine, Ivan Doig, years and years ago, came out to the house because we were going to do a program for NPR, because we didn't think sculpture would go over too well on radio. What we did, he came out with a tape recorder, because I told him how different stone has a different sound. And it does. It does. Even to the point of when you finish it. You can finish a piece of statuario marble and you hit it with lightly, and it has a ring to it. It's like a little porcelain bell. And when it's rough and rugged, it's thump, thump, thump. But if it has a flaw in it, chum, chum, and you can hear it, you can listen to it. So we went around to maybe a dozen different stones, and we're hitting it with a different hammer and a different this and a different that. And I said, you got all that? And he said, yeah, I'm not sure what it sounds like, but I'll send it to NPR. Never heard of it. True story, but that's a voice. That is really a voice that was not heard at NPR. Well, listen, you've been great, and it's been a pleasure and an honor, and we're not going to forget this day. No, we're not going to forget this. So let's clear the chairs and have a chance to mingle around and see the work.
That was very entertaining. We have one more person here. Tim Bruce, longtime friend of Phil's, was just going to get up and just have just a few words just to kind of close it off.
So I think many of you know that Phil's been my very best friend, and I've collected his work, my wife and my family and I have, for 30 years. And so we're graced to have so much of it in our home, and we're always there to share that with you. But in preparation for this day, Gail Mann called me and said, I'm doing an article about Phil, and could I come and visit with you a little bit? And I said, sure, come on. So one of the first questions, she's there with her recorder pad, and she goes, why do you collect Phil McCracken's work? Why so much? And we took a walk around the house. And for example, like the piece in the back, the wood heron, that piece was one of Phil's very first serious pieces that he did when he was in college. And it spent the better part of its life in Morris Graves' house, sitting on his buffet right by his dining room table. Now eventually when Morris passed away, that piece came back to Phil. If you walk around this tableau, which is sitting over here, shows Phil's sense of humor, for one thing, but it's one of his more recent pieces. If you go over here, you see pieces that reflect Phil's deep interest in the cosmos and in the universe. Phil's one of my only friends, he's probably my only friend that I can talk about string theory and quantum physics, because he loves it, and all that study that goes into those kind of pieces. But over the years, what I've learned from Phil has been enormous. My family and I have learned about the environment. We've learned about caring for creatures, and all creatures, big and small. And we've learned about the universe and our place in the universe, and how important that all is to care for it. And we learned that from Phil. So when Gail asked the question, why do you collect so much of Phil's work? Why do you have that? It's because every morning when I get up, I look at Phil's work and I see Phil. So as you walk around today and look at Phil's work, know that not only are you seeing what Phil wants you to see and what he wants you to think about and learn, but you're seeing Phil. So enjoy it.
Thank you.